Have you found somebody else? Yeah. I hear you said you found somebody old. Yeah, so that's fine. So we just go to HDMI. Okay, and then that's in the computer, isn't it? Great, thank you.
That's why I was the whole. That's why I know the comments.
Sounds like it might be. Get it all out and not like it. This hospital, let's get that on the 24th. Someday for these like 20 and 3 months. It wasn't there's going to be another. Wait, I'm like, and then you just say, I'm gonna ask. I was her chauffeur. She emailed me, chauffeur. They probably got funny. Yeah. Anyway, let's go.
Ask me behind the local station.
I wasn't where she goes. Yeah.
Oh, ugly. Yeah, no, I know.
Yes. 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 Yes, I've been in, yes.
Do you believe it in my pocket?
Yes, I believe Oh, yes, there are one question. I'll have to find out which one it is. Wait, ready. Go upstairs to my office area there. Check out the books. I love just being surrounded by so much. Oh, really?
You got master, yeah?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So I'm just going to do a bit of yeah. So I'll put it round to the side here. So I can what I'll do is so one of but there were so many key people missing. I was like, okay, everyone. Hi, everyone. Just to say, we're going to be starting in a couple of minutes. just because we can put out some more seats. If you have a bag on your seat, if you could actually move it so we can make room for everybody else. Just to say, there's a couple of seats down here as well. So just free up those seats if you can, because we want to get everybody in. I'm just going to do the housekeeping before we start. There are toilets on each floor, just in case you're looking for one. But there's one just outside to the right as well. My name is, there's 2 seats right here. It's right. But what I'm going to do is just, when you get around a little bit, I'm just doing this at the moment, just for housekeeping. You'll be able to see. Okay. Where was I?
Talk about toilets.
Yes, toilets. And we won't be expecting a fire alarm test. So if it does go off, you have to evacuate the building. I just wanted to say my name is Lydia, and I'm one of the senior archives officers and the library and engagement and outreach officer. If you have any questions or you want to know anything throughout the evening,
Do you have like a mic?
please do ask. Yes, we do. Yeah. Just also to say,
Yes.
so this is being live streamed. So if you're going to have a personal conversation anywhere in the crowd, it's going to pick up on the microphone. So go out the door. Also, just maybe put your phones on vibrate or silence, because it is going to pick up on the speaker. So we've really optimized it for the live stream this evening. Okay. We're going to put a few more chairs at the back to the side for everybody, and then we're just going to start in a couple of minutes as we let everybody come in. But before that, are there any questions or anything you need to ask? I won't say much more. I just want to say I'm really honoured to be part of this and just supporting and being here in the room. I think I've just been really emotional, actually, just seeing everybody. It really is. So I'm just so honoured to play a very teeny tiny part. And in a few minutes, I'll just hand over to Hakeem Adi. I'm just going to get my colleague in who's checking the live stream first, okay? And then we'll get started. Thanks. Are you going to do
I think that's
Martins.
Okay, because everybody's sitting with some expectation, I'll start things off. We are actually waiting for a microphone. There were some technical difficulties with the mics tonight, so we thought that we might be able to get away without one, but I think it's probably better to have a mic for people in the back who are hard of hearing, getting a bit older, and all that kind of, exactly. When I'm talking about you, I'll let you know. Don't worry. So first of all, just to say thank you to everybody for coming. I should explain those who don't know me. My name is Hakim Adi. I'm a long-standing friend and colleague of Marika for many years. And those of you who knew Marika will know what an organized person she was. And so like most things, she also organized this event tonight, or at least she provided the guidelines for the event tonight. And we're going to try and follow them as best we can. I think probably everybody here has some experience, reminiscences, memories of Marika. We did think about the possibility of everybody speaking, but we thought maybe that wouldn't necessarily work so well within the time restraints that we have. So we've asked 9 or 10 people who kind of cover different aspects of Marika's life and work to say a few words. And we have some other things to share with you tonight besides food and drink and so on. I was just to say, it's very good to see this. Some people here I haven't seen for a very, very long time. In fact, several people I didn't recognize. Fortunately, I still have the same boyish look. And so everybody recognized me, which is very helpful. I should just stress one thing while we're waiting for the mic, that this is very much a celebration of Marika's life and work. And so people should be in a celebratory frame of mind. And we hope that all the contributions that people make, things that people say tonight, will be in that same vein. Well, it sounds like a mic.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. Okay. So I think I've said all I wanted to say by way of introductory remarks. I'll try and think of some other things to say later. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker tonight. And our first speaker, I think, won't mind me introducing her as Marika's granddaughter, Kim Sherwood, who is going to come and say a few words. So thank you, Kim.
Hello, everybody. It's so wonderful to see you all here from all of the different walks of Marika's life. I'm going to just say a few words on the behalf of Marika's family, her brother Andy, my big sister Rosie, my mum Ellie, and of course my dad Craig, who is very sad not to be able to be here with us tonight. Marika had, as she would often tell me, a long, rich life, and that had many, many chapters to it. And all of you perhaps experienced some of those chapters and heard her stories from across her life. She was born in Hungary in 1937 to a Jewish Hungarian family. Some of you might know that her father was in forced labor service. Her mother managed to secure false Christian papers to get her baptized to save the family. She witnessed atrocities as a child and she carried those memories with her, but I think they also gave her strength for the fights that she went on to commit herself to for her entire life. The family moved to Australia in 1948. And then in the 1960s, Marika settled here in London, in North London. But she lived all over the world. She lived in Sicily. She lived in Harlem in the 80s. She returned to London. She made regular trips to Ghana, to her village, as she said, which was another home for her. She made regular trips to archives all over the world, and I've heard from so many archivists and librarians from every city you could think of writing to me to say how much they're going to miss her visits and how much they valued her. And then for the last 20 or so years, she's been in Kent, and again, we have people here from that last chapter of her life as well, which is amazing. When I was growing up, Marika lived with us. She lived in the upstairs flat until I was about 12. And I wanted to share just a few memories with you. Marika taught me and my big sister Rosie to swim at the Lido on Hampstead Heath. She taught my sister how to float. Rosie would put her arms around Marika's neck and lie on her back, and Marika would say, kick your legs and then you'll get used to the idea of floating. And when I was learning how to swim, I was actually afraid. I was afraid of drowning. And Marika would put her palm out and she would say, just lie back and put your head in the palm of my hand and I will hold you. And I would be scared as I did it until I reached the palm of her hand, and then I wasn't scared anymore. I think she kept so many of us afloat. She supported children and single mothers wherever she went in the world, and she gave people a home who wouldn't have had a home without her. She buoyed up those who needed a champion, and she brought hidden histories to the surface. Rosie and I returned to Budapest with her, a place that she always felt was so central to her identity and she kept in her heart. And that was really important for us as well, because then we came to feel Hungarian too, and she shared that identity with us. One of my fondest memories of Marika is in Budapest in Heroes Square, which has this amazing kind of mosaic floor, like a checkerboard. And we were walking across Heroes Square together, and then suddenly Marika just started skipping across the squares. It was as if she was playing hopscotch, and she was so happy. She just looked joyful, and I'll always hold on to that image of her playing hopscotch on Heroes Square in her 60s. Her love of history and travel was really formative for Craig, my dad. They drove across the Sahara together in a Land Rover when Craig was just 11, when he got out of primary school. She took him on adventures. She took him to Sicily with her for 6 months, and inspired a love of history in him and a love of travel. He spent the rest of his life traveling around the world. And she inspired so much for me as well. My love of libraries, my love of research, my love of history. I've gone on to become a historical novelist because Marika ignited that spark in me. And I remember she took me to Senate House Library when I was about 12. And it was astonishing to me that there was this palace of books and you could go in there and take any book you want. She said to me, you can choose any book you want. And I found that the most magical idea. And she spent hours with me going around the shelves until I found the book that I wanted. And I wanted to sign up immediately and become a member. And they said, you're only 12, you have to, have to grow up a little bit. But I didn't really want to wait. So unbeknownst to anybody, when I had to return my book, I took it back to the Senate House Library, I gave it back to them. And then I noticed the door was open and no one was guarding it. So I broke into Senate House Library when I was 12. And I spent the day evading security in the stacks. And it was one of the best days of my life. And I think for all of us, listening to stories tonight has been really beautiful, because for all of us, she ignited, she inspired, she protected, she championed, she loved. And I will miss her beautiful hands holding me up. And I will try and live up to her legacy. So thank you all very much for coming here tonight to celebrate that legacy.
So thank you so much to Kim for starting us off this evening. Our second speaker tonight is Tayo Aluko, who's a longtime friend of Marika, who is going to come and say a few words of his memories of Marika.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm sure none of you can say that you were introduced to Marika by Paul Robeson. I was.
Wow.
But I'll go back a few years. I was singing somewhere in Liverpool and a woman came up to me and said, I reminded her of Paul Robeson. Did I sing any of his songs? And that was probably the first time I heard that name. This was in 1995. I stumbled on his biography after that and knew that I had to tell that story. And then a few years later, I heard about this conference at SOAS on the 100th anniversary of his birth, organized by Marika and Hakim. So that is where I first met Marika. I've been performing that play since then, since 2007, actually. But the woman who said to me, I reminded her of Paul Robeson. If I met her today, I wouldn't know who she was. All I know that she was this white woman said to me, you remind me of Paul Robeson. And so I always think of that woman as an angel that changed my life. Now, I moved, I was living in Liverpool at the time. And then some years later, when I was in the home of a man called John Gibson, who I had been introduced to, if I wanted to know anything about Paul Robeson, he was like the Northwest organizer for the Communist Party. So I became a friend of his. And then I met this woman at his house. She was doing research into a Liverpool figure called Pastor Daniel Zakate. And we realized we had met before. And our paths diverged again. And so many years later, her book was published, went out of print, and in the last 2 or 3 years, it's been published again with help from me and Professor Stephen Smalls from California, who actually insisted that that book needed to be reprinted. Now, my introduction by Marika to Stephen Smalls was very, very important. This is the story of a man who arrived in Liverpool from Nigeria in 1915, did a lot of wonderful work, unsung, sabotaged, etc., died in 1964 and almost forgotten until Marika resurrected him. And his story, sad though it is, for me is very inspiring, so much so that I've always wanted to write about him. I thought I'm gonna write a play, I thought I'm gonna write an opera, but now I know it's going to be a TV series. I've never written for TV before, but I've never written a play before either. So it's going to be a TV series, and it's going to be a TV series told from the perspective of a modern day Black man in Liverpool, perhaps former architect, perhaps. But the key thing is that it will start with a mysterious woman coming up to him, giving him a box of archive material of Pastor Daniels and disappearing. And that woman is Marika. So Marika will always be an angel. And it's strange for me to be able to say that she's one of these ancestral spirits, that I have an ancestor who was a Jewish Hungarian woman. Thank you very much.
So many thanks to Taigo for those few words. I think there was a slight confusion there because it sounded like he was talking about the resurrection of Steve. I have to say Steve is alive and well in California and sends his apologies that he couldn't be here tonight. But I think the resurrection was Daniel Zakate, just in case anybody goes away with slight confusion. I think we're going to hear a lot of crossovers between all of us who are speaking tonight, because there are friends and colleagues that we have in common, or we meet in different places, and so on and so forth. But anyway, continue and see how we do and try and keep all the threads together. Now, our next speaker has known Marika since he was an even younger young man than he is now. I don't think I'm going to say anymore. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Morgan and I also go back a very long way. We went to university together about, about half a century ago? Like that. Impossible. So, but Morgan Morgan knew Marika when she was a teacher. And he can explain everything. Morgan.
Yeah.
Salam alaikum, merhaba, sakafet. We're bien content pour vous. I knew Marika from school days, but she never taught me formally. I was in the same school as her, but she did work such as teaching us how to do intelligence tests, and she also did some counseling. And if you like, she was a figure who was around. She did know my English teacher, and through that I met her. So I'd say I'd be in 5th form or 6th form at the time we meet. Marika was always clear about the crisscross nature of human nature, of good and evil across classes, genders, and races. She crossed the path in my case in that she allowed me to do the revision for my A-levels in her flat, given my crowded family circumstances. It was just, can you allow your son to study at my flat to my mother? And I did. I can't say that the result in terms of the A-level results were good, but definitely in terms of the people who I met there, Paul Newberg, a Hungarian reporter, and also the unforgettable John Nwodo from Nigeria, who used to punctuate the things that he said with Shakespearean prose. He talked to me about the evils of human nature. And the next minute, Morgan, Caesar was ambitious. And that was a grievous fault. And grievously, Caesar answered it. So I gained a kind of contact in things that I wouldn't otherwise have got. Marika was proud in terms of Jews fighting back. My example of that was I'd left school and then we met up again. And at that stage, I was reading a Jewish nationalist book called Exodus. And in it, the Jews were heroes and heroines fighting against the bad guys, etc. And Marika was the first to caution me that although she was happy in seeing them fight and not be victims, there were issues I needed to be aware of. She first told me about European Jews seeing themselves as superior to the North African Jews, and of Israeli Jews, some of them, although being very nationalistic, had not suffered some of the horrors that her family had experienced hands-on in Hungary. After that, when I'd been to Hungary and came back, Marika then talked to me about Jews being shot on the side of the Danube. They shoot one, leave the other, then shoot the next one, so that when they fell into the river, they brought each other down. She talked about her family getting ready to try and escape. And so she was given something brought out in your book. They put lots of the valuables in a teddy bear and gave it to Marika, that if the others got bumped off, she could escape with the teddy bear. She also talked about a relative who, because the gas chamber was full, they kicked her body out. And so one of Marika's relatives escaped that way. She also discussed an experience, I think, somewhere in New Guinea with a black person who first talked to her about the issue of being discriminated against because he was black. Marika found the idea very slimy and disgusting because it brought back to her all of these memories and all of this evil. And she then, if you like, also dedicated herself to trying to ameliorate or change these kind of oppressions. On another angle, she wondered if her brownish color was because of the fact that Roman troops, some of whom were African, were stationed in Hungary years and years ago. Whatever it was, we continued our friendship over many years. She had taken up issues of Pan-Africanism, issues of Black studies, etc., and continued that. I myself had moved on to languages and African and Caribbean languages. So our conversations were often about comparing notes. I'm doing this, what do you think? I'm doing that, etc. And in terms of as the years moved on, it was really an itinerary of somebody who'd say to you, well, I went to the doctor and he told me, Morgan, for my age, I was as strong as a horse. That's Marika. And that went on for quite a number of years. As things went on, like all of us, life became painful, and she found it difficult to move because of pains in her body. And not only that, she lost the capacity to do her favorite thing, which was research and writing. And she felt very cheated. Indeed, what was on her mind was, as the English would say, she wanted to top herself, mate. And really, I was trying to say, no, no, don't do it. But it's that kind of development. In our last meeting, she continued in the same vein, but she was rebellious to the last. We went to our usual cafe and were going back to her home. At that stage, she has a Zimmer frame, and the roads there didn't have much pavement. So Marika is pushing her Zimmer frame up the road and cars are coming. And I'm saying, come on, Marika, let's move to the side. Yeah, no, let them move. Let them move. Rebellious to the last. So all I'd say is I was very lucky to have such a friend. And all of us have been lucky to make contact with her. And basically, all I can say of any use is the Hausa song of farewell, or I call it so. Dan Adam, be iya yuwa ingba ze shafe juna, saboda haka, inna shafeka kaya feni, na riga na shafeka. The Son of Man and woman doesn't seem to be able to live without rubbing up each other at times the wrong way. Because of that, if you have rubbed me the wrong way, I forgive you. And if I have rubbed you the wrong way, forgive me as I've already forgiven you. So she had that kind of perspective. And at the same time, she held these strong beliefs about human justice, which appeared not only in her written work, in people who she helped, her concern about her family, her support to her family in every way possible, her support to her friends in every way possible. At times, some people I felt did not deserve it, but that's just Morgan talking. But she was this type of person that the heart and the mind meant the same thing. We love you, Marika.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Anyway, I don't need to say anything else. Okay, so our next contribution, we thought it was important that Marika speaks to everybody here. And so I'm going to ask Perry to come and present the video that has been made, and also to say something about Perry is one of the coordinators of the Young Historians Project, and may want to say something about their relationship with Marika too.
Thank you, Hakeem. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Yeah, like Hakeem said, my name is Perry. I'm one of the coordinators at the Young Historians Project, or YHP. For those of you who don't know who we are a collective of young people of African and Caribbean heritage, basically aimed at inspiring the next generation of young Black historians. So I'll try and keep it. I'll try and keep it brief because we've got a video to show you. But my first sort of encounter with Marika came during my undergraduate dissertation. I was writing about Kwame Nkrumah. I'm from Ghana, and I saw that Marika had written a book about Kwame Nkrumah, but obviously being at uni, I didn't have the money to afford it. So I thought I might as well reach out. I emailed Marika explaining the situation, and no joke, in about 30 minutes, she had emailed me the entire PDF of the book for free to read, and I got a first on my dissertation. But for those of you who knew Marika, that's not really a surprise to you at all. She was all about open access, something that will come across in the video that we see. So the video that we've got, it's taken from an interview that we, I think it was in September of 2024, so fairly recent. And in it, Marika will just share a few themes about her reason for why she did what she did, the kind of inspiration behind her work, and I just hope that I hope people can enjoy it. It took a bit of a while to kind of cobble together. It's about 12 minutes of a 40-minute interview, so I hope you guys can enjoy it.
Oops.
It's all set up and ready to go, don't worry.
Sounds like a true promise.
I mean, in many ways, I'm a Hungarian. I'm a Budapest-born Hungarian. That I was a Jew, in a way, is of very little relevance until what began to happen to Jews, because I was just one of the population there. And then during the war, when we lived under false names, and I was just, I was just part of the population. And after the war, when I went to school, I was just part of the school population. That I was a Jew was of no real relevance except to what had happened. But I had gone past that, into a different world. And it only became really important when Israel began to do what it is doing to the Palestinians. And I think, well, what does it mean to be a Jew these days? And I still don't know. I've not been to Israel. And I have been told to absolutely make no attempt to go there or to Palestine, because they said I would be immediately picked up and put in jail by the Israeli police, because I'm too dangerous, given that I have spoken out about Israel. So it only means something to me in that context, that these people calling themselves Jews are behaving like the colonialists, to the indigenous people. and doing to them what had been done to them. How do you do that? And if you are a religious Jew and you believe in a God, well, how does that God permit that? What are gods about? If so I told you about the Star of David and the influence that had on me, that I thought I experienced what I was seeing happening here. But I was appalled when I came to this mother country from Australia. And it proved to be a bit like my mother, who's the kind of mother you would certainly not want to have. Absolutely no interest in. But I think the attitude here towards Black people was even worse than that, because it's not just that there was no attitude, the attitude that could happen in what I had been told was this glorious mother country. And teaching in schools here, I was learning about the total ignorance of the teachers about the background of the Black kids in front of them. I also learned that a lot of the Black kids themselves didn't know enough of their history, sometimes nothing at all. And that there was nothing taught in the schools, so that I had to go to the local libraries, and it was only when I got a card from the British Library that I could find any books on the West Indies or Africa, because the local libraries didn't have any. And I thought, well, if I'm to understand at least the kids in front of me, I have to learn something about where they come from. But then the only book I could find, and it wasn't until the 80s, was Peter Fryer's book on the presence of Africans here. I mean, there were small books before that, but they covered very small periods. But I clearly needed to know how long they'd been here. So it was that ignorance, that ignorance, and knowing how important it was to me that I had had some years in school in Hungary after the war, so that I did learn some of my history. I had textbooks from my school in Hungarian telling me some of that history. So in a way, I knew who I was and where I came from. I mightn't have known at that time very much about how I ended up where I ended up in Australia, but that I knew who I was. I had a history. I could tell people about the history of my country. And that was just, you weren't somebody without that somehow. And that was made me decide that work needed to be done. Now, when I was working at the Polytechnic of London, this was as a student counsellor. And I went to the lectures by Colin Prescott, who was teaching there, and he was giving courses on underdevelopment. And I thought, well, that would teach me about why Africa and the Caribbean is what it is now. And we became friends. And I said to Colin, well, you're in this academia, and, you're interested in the Institute of Race Relations and so on. All this research needs to be done. And Colin just looked at me, and he and I both laugh about this till today. Because he said, Marika, then get on and do it. He didn't even have a degree in history. How on earth would I do any research? And Colin just said, if you think it's important, get on and do it. So I said, okay. And that's how it began, because it needed to be done. And there was nobody you could go to. But it must have started because I realized that something like that was very important. Colin said, get on and do the history. And there were just no organizations. And I thought we needed an organization that could encourage research but also in a way introduce people to each other. That's why we started the newsletter. And I think the newsletter was quite successful in doing that. You know, I don't know that there's anything now that people can read where they learn about other Black organizations in different towns and cities, or learn about new books published and new articles published and new conferences being held. All of that was in the journal, which I think was very important. Well, it's what I mentioned there. The back page was always a biography of somebody. Then there were articles written by different people because it was the only place you could have anything published about any aspects of the history of Black people's here. So we had articles, and then people began to send us information about articles they had published themselves. They sent us information about relevant books that were published, you know, it was all printed up. Then people began organizing locally and were holding conferences and meetings, and that was all advertised and then reported in the newsletter. So I think reporting a conference would have enthused people somewhere else to say, well, so many people came and it was popular, let's try and have one here. So I think it was very, very, very important. We fought with the government. Well, we fought with the government about the curriculum, about teacher training. Then we had discussions with different museums about their exhibitions and their ignorance and the ignorance of their staff. A lot of the material relating to this has been kept. So I think if anybody wants to follow up, and it should be followed up because the museums still don't always have the full exhibition they ought to have. The curriculum is still anywhere from satisfactory, as is the teacher training and the school textbooks. So if you want to take this up again with the government, it might help to look at the early discussions we had and the early correspondence. So in a way you can say, well, we began this discussion 20 years ago and, you know, we had to keep doing it. So please, I hope people will continue. I think Black History Month events should continue and become not just a month event, maybe. I think if we could persuade, for example, the BBC History magazine, which is sent to me for review every month, which very, very seldom has anything relevant in it. And I think it's read by many people. If they could be persuaded to begin every month to have something about Africa in there. I mean, it's a huge continent. Think of how much history there is there. And not just history. I mean, let's learn about what sort of agriculture was going on there. What were the Africans doing about the gold that we all wanted, with the diamonds that we all wanted? When we decided to go and trade there, did we just follow the African trade routes? You know, there are many questions that could be raised by journals like the BBC History magazine or History Today. I don't know if there are other popular history magazines. And I don't know anything about social media because I believe that's what young people watch so much. So I can't say anything about that at all. But probably for those of you who understand that and how it works, there should be something there regularly just to open doors. You know, show some photographs of some of the very early cities. And say, do you recognize this city? We say, well, you know, this is where it was and this is when it was built. So I think we have to do as much as we can in as many ways as we can. And certainly with the popular history magazines, I think it would be wonderful to meet with their editors and say, well, how can we get you to do this? And whom can we put you in contact with who could write for you? I think documents are very important. And I think we need a massive campaign to the government to release all the withheld files. I mean, they might not have withheld everything, they might just have destroyed some. But I know that some have just been withheld. And for example, to give you an example of that, when I was researching George Padmore, there was a list of archives all withheld. So we campaigned and campaigned. And then they released 2 files. And even within that file, some pages have been withdrawn and some paragraphs and sentences totally blanked out. So what is that like about manipulating history? So what Padmore was doing was of so much relevance that we have to hide it all. It might reveal us more about the situations within the colonies and the situation of Black people here. Government files should all be available to the public, and yes, people will begin to learn that this is not a glorious mother country, that it's a somewhat inglorious country that has done an enormous amount of damage to so many people all over the world, and we have to recognize that.
So that's only 14 minutes, but that's a tremendous amount of work to put that video together with the subtitles. And so I think that Perry and YHP should be congratulated on the. It also highlights something that Marika was very keen that we focused on tonight, which is the work that she spent the last 40 odd years of her life engaged in. The organization that she referred to, which was referred to in the video, we generally refer to as BASA. I don't know, can anybody remember its original name?
The Association for the Study of African, Caribbean,
and Asian.
And Asian, history and culture in Britain.
Culture and history in Britain. Very good. Exactly. And the person who's just told you that is Andrew Fenyo, Marika's brother, who typeset all the newsletters that Marika produced back in the 1990s. And she referred to the newsletter in that clip, or those clips. And Andrew was a person who put all of that together and did an excellent job. And if you look through the newsletters, everyone says many thanks to Andrew for doing this. So that organization that was formed in 1991, we thought that we'd spend a little bit of time hearing from those who were involved about some of the things that Marika mentioned in that video. So I'm going to ask Caroline. Where is Caroline? There she is. Caroline, who was a former secretary of BASA, to come along and say something about the newsletter. And she'll introduce what else she's going to say herself. Hopefully.
Sorry, I did try to print mine out, but the printer wasn't working, so I'm going to read it off my laptop. So yeah, I'm Caroline Brassey. Many people know me as Kaz, and I got to know Marika and Hakeem and many others here when I was a PhD student through the BASA network. And Hakeem asked me to speak for 3 minutes about the Bassa newsletters, so not long, 3 minutes, which were published, as Hakim said, from the early 1990s, 3 times a year, which Marika edited until the end of 2006. And just one of the many important works that Marika undertook as her commitment to fostering and disseminating the histories of Black and Asian peoples. I'm sure many of you have seen copies of it. If not, I brought some. They are from my own personal archive. Please do not leave with them.
Sorry, Kaz, can I just interrupt you? The first 3 issues on the table at the end, which are my personal, are not to be removed.
Okay, so don't remove them. If you're not sure, come to either of us and we will look at them. But I was pleased when Hakim asked me to speak about the newsletter, because I realised when I thought about what I would say, thinking about them, was how much the newsletters sort of reflect Marika's wider commitment to social justice. So there is a huge amount of hours of work held in the pages of these newsletters, and its name disguises how much scholarship was shared in its pages. The newsletter was direct, as you get a bit of a sense of the film. Marika could be a tough critic. It was produced as cheaply as possible. I was looking back, the earliest issues were £1. I don't think it ever became more expensive than £2. Dissemination was always so important, but it was also, it always looked nice. Marika was a very stylish lady, and I think, you know, she thought about all aspects of this work. The earliest copy I have in my collection is from number 7, from September 1993, when Bassa was still known as the Association for the Study of African, Caribbean, Asian and Culture and History in Britain. Perhaps someone will talk about the meeting where we changed the name. I won't go into that, it was long. But the September 93 issue covers still familiar topics, arguing for the place of Black people in the national curriculum, as reflected in a report on a workshop for teachers that took place on the 24th of April with the Historical Association. There are relevant events and upcoming programmes highlighted, and a wide number of reviews, as Marika said in the film, and publications, from academic papers to books and local council and community group pamphlets. A reflection on Marika's insistence that valuable historical research occurred in many places, not just, if at all, in universities. And as she said in the film, the Bassa Network was really the only collective of Black people working on Black history that I could draw upon when I was working on my PhD. It involved teachers, some of us were researchers, people who were just interested in the history of Black and Asian people. The Bassa newsletter was where I first published some of my research, and I'm sure that was the same for many others. As an editor, Marika was insistent that contributions were to be written as an accessible a language as possible. Her criticisms of academic work that excluded through language were deep and harsh, and something that I've always tried to bear in mind with my own writing. And looking back through the newsletters, I think they give a sense of how groundbreaking the material in the newsletter was. And that Marika was in tune, particularly as well, to the importance of foregrounding the work of Black women of colour, with pieces on Beryl Gilroy and Mary Seacole in 2001, and a special issue on Claudia Jones in 2006. And then also Marika set up these really important legacies. So that work continued after she left the collective. There's a report on the launch of Memorial 2007 from 2006, and a piece by the archivist Leslie Richmond on Glasgow University and slavery published in 2010. For a few years, I would help Marika in the distribution of the newsletter, which meant chatting away and eating biscuits while stuffing envelopes with copies to be sent out to subscribers in her office at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, and then taking them to the post box because it was cheaper to put the stamps on ourselves and post them and get them franked. And a copy was always sent to the British Library to ensure that there was sort of an intervention in at least one institutional space. And I checked the British Library catalogue before coming and was pleased, and I must say relieved, to see that the run still comes up. Although it is down as having been created from 1997, and has no fixed end date. So, you know, something to check up on in the archive there. As sort of Marek would say, the work is never done. But in that September 1993 issue, Marika's editorial mourns the loss of Peter Blackman, the historian and activist born in Barbados who had settled in London in the 1930s. A good friend of the association, Marika announced that the first BASA conference that would take place later in the year would be dedicated to him. His passing, she observed, raised important issues for how the work undertaken by a generation of historians was to be remembered. How were we to celebrate those whose names were never up in lights, who worked away in back rooms, writing, organizing, researching, thinking, planning, often making it possible for others to achieve fame? I'm sure Marika did not for one moment think of herself as one of those elders at the time, but that is the work that she also did. And it is now our turn to miss her deep laugh, her searching mind, and her store of knowledge. But it is also time to celebrate her as a historian, an intellectual, and an activist. Thank you, Marika.
So we've got another contribution from Hannah Ishmael, who couldn't be here tonight, but she sent something. And we'll see what she said.
So we say that Hannah Ishmael was for a long time an archivist at the Black Cultural Archives and worked with us on as part of the advisory board and knew Marika well through that too. So this is what she sent. She's very sorry not to be with us. There are so many ways that Marika has made her mark on the field of Black British historical research. But for me, one of the most profound has been her co-founding of BASA and her work in the archive sector. It's not just BASA itself, but the network of its members who've supported me so generously throughout my career, first as a young archivist at Black Cultural Archives and later as a PhD researcher at UCL. Over the years, I've seen how BASA has been a source of strength and inspiration for so many of us through individual projects and publications and discussions. It is through that community that Marika and others helped to build. In my case, the work of Hakeem and Caroline Brassey played such an important role in searching my own journey, and I'm deeply grateful for all their work and the foundation that Marika and BASA laid. Throughout my PhD research into the historical development of Black Cultural Archives, the George Padmore Institute, and the Huntley Collection at now London Archives, I repeatedly heard from my interviewees about how instrumental Marika's early research had been. They spoke of her unwavering commitment to making space for Black history and the critical work of Black community archives, especially during a time when mainstream heritage organisations offered little to no recognition or support. Marika's belief in the importance of these archives and her tireless efforts to advocate for them was key. When I look back on my own work, attempting to situate the development of these Black-led archives within a broader intellectual framework, I recognise how extensively I and others have drawn upon the research of Marika, particularly in her groundbreaking publications with Hakeem on Pan-African figures. Their book, Pan-African History, Political Figures from Africa and the Diaspora since 1787, was transformative for me. It opened my eyes to the depth and power of Pan-Africanism as both a network and an ideology. And Marika's generosity in sharing her knowledge, her research, and her patience during my time at the Black Cultural Archives made a lasting impression on me. Reading through the BASA newsletters recently, I was struck by the sheer volume of important work produced by its members, and that they've set a path for others to follow, showcasing research topics, methodologies, and praxis. I don't know if Marika would have liked that word, in ways that continue to inspire. My own work as an archivist has been shaped by Marika's interventions at both the policy level and within the National Archival Framework. Her championing of Black history in local archives and institutions was truly transformative, and her advocacy for diversity in the sector remains a guiding principle for me. Now, in my role at King's College London's Department for Digital Humanities, I've begun to reflect on the importance of Marika's early focus on harnessing digital technologies to expand access to history. Her involvement in projects like CASBAR, Moving Here, and the Black Londoners database represent a pioneering spirit and a dedication to ensuring that these histories are not only preserved, but also made accessible for all. From Marika, I carry the invaluable lesson that public bodies and organisations must be held accountable. She taught me the importance of championing the work of Black and Asian historians and of relentlessly advocating for the histories that often go overlooked. I will always cherish the memory of the last time I saw Marika. She welcomed me in Harlem, the current BCA archivist, and me into her home with such kindness. We talked about her remarkable archives, which are a testament to her love and care for history. Those archives will forever stand as part of her formidable legacy, a monument to the life she lived, her unyielding dedication, and the love she poured into her work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caroline, for that, and Hannah too. I forgot to say that Colin Prescott was going to come and speak to us about his important relationship with Marika. Unfortunately, he's unwell and so cannot be with us. So I told him that we'd soldier on without him. And so I just wanted to add something to what you just heard, because this may be something which is known to everybody here, but it's probably worth saying anyway. That before Marika and others organised Asa Kacharib, as we used to call it back in the day, before it became Bassa, there was no real network of people working on or focusing on the history of African, Caribbean, or South Asian people in Britain. There were individuals, maybe one or two individuals working on these things. But what Marika did, which is a very good lesson for all of us, I think, is that she brought people together, because she recognized that when people come together, they exchange information, they're much stronger in the things they want to achieve than when they try and do them on their own. So that was really the importance of forming that organization in 1991. And I think I said in the obituary that was published that Bassa really was a vehicle for Marika, especially in the early years, in the first 10 years. After about 10 years, we needed some money. So we decided we probably needed a constitution and a few other bits and pieces to make it seem like it was a proper organization and so on. But it was really, even then, it was still a vehicle for Marika, because she was the whirlwinds that needed to be kind of harnessed, as it were, directed in certain ways. And that's what Bassa gave her. It gave her an organization from which and within which she could operate and do all the things that she wanted to do. And we've heard about some of these things, but I just wanted to mention a few others. And of course, I've got loads of anecdotes, so I don't know whether I can share them with you tonight. But just one while I'm rearranging my phone. Oh, there it is. Well, I remember once she talked about museums. I remember once we organised a meeting, this was back in the day, at the Imperial War Museum. And we went and saw the director. We had a meeting with the director. Now, if you go to the Imperial War Museum today, I haven't been recently, but they have all sorts of nice exhibitions that are very inclusive and so on. But in those days, this would have been the early 90s, it wasn't like that at all. And we went and we had this meeting with this guy, and he listened very politely to what we had to say, which was along the lines that, well, you call this an Imperial War Museum, but we don't see anything that reflects empire in the sense of people from Africa, the Caribbean, Asia are completely absent in this museum. What do you think you're doing? And he listened very politely to this, and then he literally just showed us the door. Thank you and goodbye and so on. And we had many such meetings. I won't go into all of them now, but I just wanted to mention one other thing. So I forgot I had to look at this phone. About archives, because archives are another area in which Marika was really instrumental, and it's these days archives kind of pride themselves, the National Archives, just to give the National Archives as an example, kind of prides itself that it includes things about, you know, black people, this kind of thing, as if it's a kind of very natural. But in those days it was extremely unnatural, and most of the change, I would say quite a lot of the change, is due to Marika's campaigning. And we had, I've just noted down here, we had a, back in '92, it was the first time I could find, we had, Marika took me along, and we addressed the British Records Association. This was in 1992. That was one of the first occasions I can remember. And we went along with Sam Walker from Black Cultural Archives at that time. Shows you how long ago it was. And we addressed this Records Association basically along the lines of, well, why don't your records reflect the fact that there were people here from Africa, the Caribbean, Asia, or people who were born in this country just happen to be black people. So that's the first instance that I can remember of this campaigning over archives. And then a few years later, BASA actually organized a conference. I don't know how many of you remember that. We actually organized a conference in 1999 with all the major archives, the Society of Archivists, the National Archives, etc., on the whole question of archives. What do archives contain? How are they catalogued? What kind of terms do they use? Why are they actually hiding a large percentage of the population? All that was Marika's work. Then we set up a Black and Asian Archives Working Party. Some of you may remember that, again from the 90s, with many of the major archives, record offices, again, talking about the same things. They need to change. All of this was Marika's work. And I could go on and on and on. We heard, I think, in Hannah's piece, talked about CASBAR, which was basically a mapping exercise set up by the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. That was all Marika's work. I know the Institute of Commonwealth Studies will claim that they had something to do with it. That's basically Marika's work. In the newsletter, she issued an appeal to local record offices and to local historians and family historians. If they find anything in their records or in their researches relating to the history of African, Caribbean, Asian people in this country, they should send it to us. And we got inundated with people sending in. If you look at the old newsletters, there would be 2 or 3 pages every time of this information from 16th century onwards. And Fabian will remember there was an attempt to find funding for all this. Anyway, if you go through the records, I couldn't remember what actually happened to that, but anyway. But all of this was Marika's work, and it made a tremendous impact, a tremendous difference, as did the setting up of that association. So we want to continue with saying a little bit more about Marika's activities. And it's quite funny because I was looking at the newsletter. If you just look at these newsletters, it's absolutely incredible what she did. Just the fact that she edited the newsletter for 15 years, let alone all the other things in the newsletter and all the other things she did. So we're going to hear, because Marika asked us to do so, we're going to hear about all the other things she did. I'm going to ask Lucy to come along, because one of the things that BASA did was to organize conferences, not necessarily annual conferences, but we organized many conferences as well as other events. And Lucy is going to speak about the conference that we organized in Nottingham, 92, was it?
93.
93. Lucy's come all the way from Devon?
Yeah.
Just to be with us.
And it works the other way around as well, because I can't remember the number of times that Marika came down to Devon to support stuff we were doing, and that was her strength, wasn't it? I want to look at not only what she did, but how she did it and the consequences of what she did. And I want to do this through remembering the Black History Conference she organised single-handedly. She got allies and drew them in, but she did it, and which 200 people attended. And last year, in a telephone conversation with Audrey Doogie, a persistent worker in Black history in the north of England, the two of us named that conference in 1993 the best Black History Conference ever. Now, what made it the best Black History Conference for us two? And I think it was because Marika just caught a moment in time, over 32 years ago. She could feel that boiling underground potential in the 1990s phase of uncovering and telling Britain's Black history. And she seized the chance to get people at different stages to work together. So there were her inspirational conference, Black Peoples in Britain, Local Histories, encouraged people to bring what they had uncovered so far in Black British history in their own areas. And these areas included Tyneside, Wellingborough, Northampton, Butetown in Cardiff, Kent, Bristol, Nottingham, Liverpool, Devon, Birmingham, and various areas in London. And there we were, we got together, we were sharing information and inspiring ourselves, you know, sparking off each other to return home and uncover more. And write-ups of some of those presentations appeared later in the Bassa newsletter. And I just want to describe to you what I felt like catching the train from Devon to Nottingham. And I'd written a paper and I sat in the train and I just said, they're not going to believe me. They're not going to believe me. And that's because that's the response I was getting in Devon when I told people about the history of their county. And I went to the archive office, and the archivist, I was looking up something about slavery plantations in Antigua owned by the Sweet family of Modbury. And he thought I was interested in this. So he brought out a folder and he brought it over to me and showed it to me. And the title on the folder was Curiosities. So we're talking, I think it was about 88, 89. It was before the bicentenary of the publication of Equiano's narrative. And they had no idea of even looking for whether there was a black thread in British history. So that was where I was coming from. So the next thing I do is in the conference, there were exhibitions at the back of the hall. There were 3 lots of people selling books in the back of the hall. There were readings, and there was a wonderful evening entertainment laid on by the Nottingham Association of Caribbean Families and Friends. I don't know if anyone is here from there tonight. It was fantastic. And my own weekend began waiting at after the journey up. I stood at the Nottingham bus stop to take me to the venue, and I was sort of eyeing all the people around at the bus stop, wondering if any of them were going to the same destination, and nobody was speaking to anybody. And then the atmosphere was completely cracked open when the next person arrived and said with a very friendly Caribbean accent, greeting us all, "Good morning, everyone." And the ice was utterly broken and the tone was set for the day. And that was the kind of effect Marika had in her own way too. The weekend ended on the Sunday with a museum visit to see the Black presence in Nottingham, which was jointly curated by Nottingham Castle Museum and Len Garrison, whose work you will all know with the Black Cultural Archives. That Bassa conference really created contact between individuals from all over different areas of Britain. It was so encouraging. I mean, I could weep for what it did for me, and I know I was not the only person. And if you want to know more about the conference, Audrey wrote it up. I don't know if you know the website Historical Roots. Historical spelt history. and then Cal at the end, with a Y, I mean, not with an I. And just search for the best Black History Conference. She's put loads of details in there. And I just want us to, the other thing I want to say is that, you know, that was the best Black History Conference ever. No, it wasn't. There's going to be more. Because what's important with what Marika did is she caught that moment, and the best conference is catch whatever the moment is and move it on and get us to do more. But she caught it then, and it was crucial, and it did make an enormous difference to a lot of people. So I want us, obviously, to continue creating events which inspire us to dig deeper in our understanding of Black British history. And Marika was that strong woman at the centre of that weekend. Quiet, persistent. She did her own invaluable research, we know that. And she created this kind of atmosphere for years. And the quiet, invisible work of Bassa. So I want to thank Marika too, like we all do.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in because this feels like a really nice moment to mention that Marika's last years were spent researching the history of African families in Kent. So again, that local history, and she did a lot to change understanding of history in her local area. And we have her final book on the table over here, An African Family in Kent. And my dad arranged for more to be brought here for everybody to take a copy. So please do take a copy with you. It's Marika's last gift to everybody. And she was really keen that we donate money to Médecins Sans Frontières in her name as well. So if you'd like to take a book and make a donation, that would be really lovely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. That's spoiled the surprise I had for the end. No problem. So just to, again, to perhaps re-emphasize what Lucy's just said, because that was just one conference. I can't remember all the conferences that were organised, but Nottingham was the first, and there was one in Leicester. We had a conference in Leeds, we had a conference in Northampton, several in London, and that's just those conferences. Then there were seminars for teachers, publishers, archivists, that Marika organised. And then there are the other major conferences she organised or was involved in a big way. Tayo mentioned the '98 conference at SOAS, the Robeson Conference, which again was largely Marika. And it was one of the things we used to talk about long afterwards, because the presentations of that conference were never published. And we tried so many ways to find ways of publishing them, we never managed to. But there were some amazing presentations at that conference. I remember John LaRose spoke, Richard Hart spoke, George Shepperson, some of you may have heard of, very distinguished professor, spoke. Lloyd Brown, who was Paul Robeson's, what can I say, friend, very, very close friend and comrade for many, many years. He came and spoke. I think he was in '96 at that time. It was either a day or 2 day conference that she organised. Then there was the Manchester Pan-African Congress in '95, which again Marika was instrumental in organising, and of course doing a lot of research about. I'll maybe talk later about the kind of research she carried out. Then, that's just to mention a few, then there was the seminar she organised at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies that took place quarterly, the first of those from 1991. She organised that for over 30 years on a regular basis. Got absolutely no thanks from the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. But at the end of her, or at the end, not the end, but one day they suddenly decided that she was surplus to requirements and simply dismissed her from the post she'd had also from 1991. and did our various other things I won't talk about so I don't embarrass anybody who's here tonight. So this is just some of her work. We could go on and on and on. And so that we can go on and on, I'm going to ask Martin to come and say a few words about Marika's work in connection with education, national curriculum, and all that kind of thing. So Martin Spafford.
I think I might do what Hakeem did and sit. I first met Marika at the Imperial War Museum, soon after the first election of a far-right candidate to public office in the Isle of Dogs in 1993. His party, the BNP, were latching on to the upcoming D-Day anniversary in 1994 and trying to own it. So in our school in East London, we decided to celebrate the African, Caribbean, and South Asian contribution to World War II. And the museum invited me to meet a couple of historians, one was Donald Himes, and the other of whom was this warm, engaging, insistent woman with a wealth of knowledge and connections. Thanks to her, students in our small East London school were visited by the likes of Squadron Leader Mahinder Singh Pooji, fighter pilot, Corporal Lillian Barda, and Somali ex-merchant seaman. And this meant that black and brown young people could understand that the story of World War II was their story also. Through Marika, I discovered the work of firstly Peter Fryer, Rosina Visram, and then so many other writers. And by joining BASA, met and learned from so many, some of them here, who opened my understanding of Black British history. One day, on Marika's recommendation, I met a young teacher at a boys' school in Fulham who quite independently had set up a website and resource base called Black History for Schools and had gained funding to take his students to find the field in France where Walter Tull died. Dan Lyndon Cohen is now director of the school's history project, and he can't be here this evening, but he's sent his tribute, and with your permission, I'd like to start by reading on his behalf what he's written. And Dan said this: "What do I think of when I think of Marika? Above all, a sense of connection. When we would talk, she'd often touch my arm in a way very similar to my grandmother Lilo, who, like Marika, was a survivor of the Holocaust. There was a familiarity in their accents, German and Hungarian respectively, their laughs, more of a cackle really, and the passion that poured out of them. I felt at home with Marika. Our connection went far beyond our shared commitment to social justice and the desire to drive meaningful changes in the school's history curriculum. It was a spirit of activism, the deeds, not words, but also the words, the merry thousands of words. My hope is that she was able to see the impact of her work, the change that she was part of, the young lives that have been enriched, but also that there is still so much more to do. There was an urgency and relentlessness about Marika that was deeply inspiring, and it was an honor to be part of the struggle alongside her. Tonight, using Lilo's ruby red wine glasses, I will raise one in her honor." So that's from Dan. It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes things connect. Maybe you're thinking of a person and then what you're reading seems to connect. And a few days after hearing of Marika's death, I happened to be reading Natasha Brown's wonderful 2021 novel, Assembly, in which we enter the thoughts of a highly successful Black businesswoman as she finds herself giving a motivational address to a school assembly of mainly students of color. And I'm now quoting. "The answer, assimilation. Always the pressure is there. Assimilate, assimilate, dissolve yourself into the melting pot, and then flow out, pour into the mold. Bend your bones until they splinter and crack, and you fit. Force yourself into their form. assimilate. They say it encouraging, then frowning, then again and again, and always there, quiet, beneath the urging language of tolerance and cohesion, disappear. With breathtaking ease, the facts of Britain's non-war 20th century history have been unrooted, dug out from the country's collective memory, supplanted. Vague fairy tales of benevolent imperial rule bloom instead. How can we engage, discuss, even think through a post-colonial lens when there's no shared base of knowledge? When I'm in the schools, I could try to say something to the assembly halls of children seeking inspiration, because even today, the mother country hasn't loosened her grip. Britain continues to own, exploit, and profit from land taken during its 20th century exploits, burning our futures to feed its voracious economy. Best case, those children grow up, assimilate, get jobs, and pour money into a government that forever tells them that they are not British. This is not home. Natasha Brown is well worth reading. Back to me. I can't match Dan or Natasha Brown, but I'll try. 60 years ago, as a young Hungarian woman arriving from Australia and working in a London school, Marika saw and understood what Natasha Brown is talking about. 60 years ago. And how it crushed the black young people she worked with. The passion for change never left her, nor did her sense of urgency. Her work was driven by determination to replant those histories that had been dug out. And I think those school students, faced with a gaping hole where their history should have been, stayed firmly in her mind throughout her life. And I know from Morgan that's true. Marika knew that these histories had to be found elsewhere than in the official archives and mainstream history books. 30 years ago, for example, for the teaching pack Whose Freedom that we worked on together in copies at the back, she went to self-published memoirs and autobiographies on small presses in East and West Africa and the Caribbean to dig up the lives of former Second World War combatants in their own words. I remember too how revelatory it was when at one of the Vassar conferences, archivists from all over the country talked of the stories of Black people in the 17th and 18th century England as revealed in parish registers and on gravestones, even in small rural communities. Through the work of Marika and many others, these lives were documented in the Vassar newsletter she edited. And Marika knew too that if you counter the dominant narrative, accuracy and rigor are essential, and every word matters. Every word certainly mattered to Marika. When she worked with Hakeem, Dan and me on a migration textbook, I would send her a draft text and wait for her response with an element of dread. She would have read every single word and suggested changes to nearly every sentence. Even the position of a comma mattered. Sometimes we disagreed, usually she was right. What was on the page had to be fully accountable, as close to truth as the sources reveal, as clear and coherent as possible for young readers. Her care for accuracy and directness with which she expressed her opinions could get her into trouble. I once gave her as a birthday gift a book by an extremely eminent writer on Black British experience, and discovered much later that she'd read the book and then sent the author a list of her criticisms. She also copied me into the email. And it didn't go down well. I saw her erupt with anger at the representative of a major textbook publisher when she saw that they had Equiana's face on their cover to promote the book, but no reference to him or any Black British history inside. Watching her dealing with a government minister or a chief inspector too was a lesson in how not to be fazed by power. She could be difficult in the way that people who dedicate their lives to justice can be. The injustices of the system and its exclusions made her angry. And this anger was, of course, because she cared. She really cared. Most of all, when it came to history in schools. She led a long campaign to get Black and Brown British history on the national curriculum. I suspect she believed that she'd failed in this, but she really hadn't. Thanks to the pressure led by her, the 2007 National History Curriculum required for the first time the teaching of the long ethnic and cultural diversity of Britain. When this was thrown out by Michael Gove in 2010, Busser's carefully argued response, identifying Black and Asian histories that could and should be taught in schools, played an important role in the defeat of Gove's proposals, which would have removed Black British history entirely. For the past 15 years, the absence of a prescribed curriculum has allowed change at the grassroots, as younger teachers, many of them Black and Brown, with the help of several excellent historians, activist groups such as Young Historians, the Black Curriculum, and the Advocacy Academy, have enacted change in classrooms, with additional impetus from the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, who bombarded exam boards, by the way, with criticisms of their exams. These teachers share their practice via social media, and it spreads, supported increasingly by the Historical Association and the School's History Project. Busser's work inspired OCR to establish the first migration GCSE course, later followed by all the exam boards. And to give two examples of things happening at the moment, in the War in a Babylon project, the School's History Project is working with Stafford Scott and Lucy Capes in Cottenham to create school resources from the archives of the Broadwater Farm Youth Association. And I noticed that the current issue of the National Education Union's magazine, which goes into every staff room and to most teachers, has a huge article on Runnymede Trust's Our Migration Story website that Marika and Hakeem contribute to considerably. Change is slow. But children of the generation Marika taught in the 60s are now curators of their own story increasingly. It's far too slow for Marika and for all the young people who still don't learn how Black history is British history, but it is real and it is becoming embedded. In private, Marika was kind, welcoming, an excellent listener, and a fascinating storyteller. Maybe it was her own history that meant she could not rest once she was confronted with the injustice that steered her life's work. One of my 15-year-old students, Noura Hassan, put it this way: it's as if history is a cake and they're giving us a tiny slice and pretending it's the whole cake. Noura's now doing her PhD in York on the archaeology of the Horn of Africa, by the way. And it was her work right to the end. She never stopped. I saw her 3 weeks before she died, and she told me she was still working on the history of a Black resident of Faversham, trying to get the local library to mount an exhibition. I owe Marika so much. She opened knowledge which became central to my understanding of my role as a teacher and my contribution to this world. She knew that the uncovering of these histories has barely begun. By the end, she was ready to step aside from that long road. Our best tribute to her is to stay on the road, walking with a faster, more determined pace in these perhaps darkening times.
Many thanks to Martin for those words. And yes, it brings back so many memories. As we worked together a few years ago. That's a rather strange noise.
Are you sure it's Darren?
It's possibly Marika, I don't know. But yes, I was just thinking when Martin was talking about how Marika responded to drafts that you sent her. Now we've all lost sleep over Marika's red ink all over our drafts. But it's because she cared, as Martin said, passionately about this work, and she carried that passion into everything that she did. Now, she was, of course, very well known in this country, but also very well known throughout the Caribbean, in the US, in various parts of Africa. In fact, in many parts of the world, even in Russia, she was pretty well known. I say that because we worked on very similar histories. And I remember every archive I went to, Marika had already been. But we couldn't get somebody from the Caribbean, the US, Moscow, all of these other places. Marika was very well known. But we're very fortunate to have Georgie, who's with us from Ghana, not directly from Ghana, but indirectly from Ghana, who's going to, and of course, as you know, most of you know, Marika had a very close relationship with Ghana in many ways. She had a village that she had adopted. She did a lot of her research in that country. She wrote a lot, particularly about Kwame Nkrumah and so on. And so we have a message all the way from Ghana, which we will now hear. Thank you so much.
Good evening. It's such a privilege to be here at this celebration. I did not have the privilege of ever meeting Marika, but listening to your accounts of this remarkable person, I'm very struck by this life of courage, conviction, action, and a commitment to social justice. I work at SOAS these days, but I was at the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana for 30 years. And the Institute of African Studies asked me to come and read this tribute. It's a pivot because it's written in very stilted institutional style. It will not, it's not engaging in the way in which all of you have spoken so personally about Marika. So please forgive me. Tribute to Marika Sherwood from the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. It is with deep respect and a sense of loss that the Institute of African Studies mourns the passing of Marika Sherwood, a distinguished historian and a steadfast voice in the study of the African diaspora and anti-racism. We salute this stalwart of the Pan-African struggle. While not formally a staff member of the Institute of African Studies, Dr. Sherwood's work and her connections to Ghana and the Institute have been significant. Her pioneering research into the history of Black British people, her co-founding of the Black and Asian Studies Association, BASA, and her commitment to uncovering marginalized histories resonate deeply with the scholarly pursuits of the Institute. The Institute recalls with appreciation Sherwood's participation in the Kwame Nkrumah Centenary Colloquium in Accra in 2010. Her contribution to this important event, which was convened by the African Union and the government of Ghana, highlighted her deep engagement with Pan-Africanism and the work of Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah. Her insights on Nkrumah's time in London and his engagement with the broader Pan-African movement remain invaluable. Furthermore, the Institute notes her significant publications related to Pan-Africanism and Kwame Nkrumah. In 2013, she published a chapter titled Nkrumah and Pan-Africanism, 1942 to 1958, in a book titled Hands of Africa, edited by Lazara Kizebo. In the same year, her work was included in the Kwame Nkrumah Centenary Colloquium Proceedings, co-edited by one of the Institute's former directors, Professor Emerita Tetua Meni, and a former Vice Chancellor of the University, Akilakpa Soye. More recently, the Institute's journal, the Contemporary Journal of African Studies, published Dr. Njiba Fahiwat's review of Sherwood's book, Kwame Nkrumah and the Dawn of the Cold War, published by Sub-Saharan Publishers and launched at the Institute on February 6, 2020. In 2021, the journal also published her article, The All Africa People's Congress, AAPC, called by Kwame Nkrumah and George Padmore. These and her many works demonstrate her dedication to exploring the intellectual and political currents that shaped African independence and the diaspora's role in these movements. She had a particularly soft spot for Ghana's first president and Ghana as a whole. And in her last years, many of her emails to another former director of the Institute, Professor Kusia Dumakwa-Mpofu, testified to this. She wrote, and I quote, "Did I send you the article I've written on Fanon's struggles, relations with Padmore and Nkrumah, and his time in Ghana, titled Frantz Fanon in the Struggle for African Unity? It's a paper I gave at a conference in Liverpool." End of quote. In 2019, she wrote, and I quote, "I trust you have received a copy of my book, and you'll see why it is absolutely essential that further research is carried out. We just don't know what Osagyefo Nkrumah was really facing. I should perhaps add here that a couple of months ago, I asked Lord Paul Boateng to ask in the House of Lords for the release of all papers held on George Padmore, as none were available. Response: there are two files. One will continue to be withheld. The other will be edited and released. This to me indicates that the UK is hiding much." End of quote. Sherwood had a deep commitment to making sure Ghana's derailed independence story was told. In pursuit of this, she donated 3 large boxes containing 12 of her personal files to the Institute and followed it up constantly to make sure they were delivered. She wrote, and I quote, "I hope my research papers and books are of some use, and I hope even more that there are researchers following up what's in my Cold War book. Independence had to be prevented one way or another." End of quote. She had a strong sense of urgency about this, especially as she felt that she was nearing the end of her life. Recently, when the director of the Institute of African Studies, Professor Samuel Ntewusu, and other colleagues looked through the treasure trove of materials she had sent, they were stunned at the breadth of work accumulated and saved, saddened and angered at the evidence of the colonial project and the extent of British and US efforts to undermine Ghana's success at independence, and excited by the research possibilities of this important archive. The Institute recognizes Dr. Marika Sherwood's lifelong commitment to Ghana's history, her tireless work in challenging racial discrimination, and her significant contributions to the fields of African diaspora studies and Pan-African history. Her scholarship has undoubtedly enriched our understanding of these crucial areas. We extend our deepest condolences to her family, her friends, and her colleagues. Her legacy as a passionate historian and advocate for social justice will continue to inspire scholars and activists for generations to come. Though she's no longer with us, Dr. Sherwood's impact on African studies, particularly in relation to the diaspora and Pan-Africanism, will be remembered, and her work will continue to be a valuable resource for the Institute of African Studies and the wider academic community in Ghana and beyond. Nanti Ye for Beneful Marika Sherwood, which means
So this last contribution touches on America's scholarship, and I thought I'd just say just a few words. It's actually very difficult to say a few words about America's scholarship. She wrote some 20 books, close to 100 articles of various kinds, some in academic journals, but many others in a more popular format. She self-published 7 books. So her kind of academic contribution, as it were, or scholarly contribution, is unequaled. There is nobody in this country, probably in any sphere of history, who has contributed as much as she had, but particularly in the field which she chose. It's completely unparalleled. And we tend to think of her as focusing on what today people call Black British history. As you've heard, she also wrote on Africa. Perhaps one of her most well-known books after abolition was on the subject of what Britain did after the Abolition Act and what the British government and those connected with it did after the Abolition Act in 1807 and so on. So she wrote on a vast variety of subjects. And as I say, particularly in her field, she's completely without parallel and should be recognized as such. It was, of course, after many years of trying that, on my behalf, I have to say, that she was finally awarded an honorary doctorate by a university that I won't mention. But it's typical of Marika that when that university got rid of me, she immediately wrote to me and said, should I send back an honorary doctorate? And I had to forcefully persuade her to hang on to it, that you deserve it. Whoever's given it to you, don't worry. But that was typical of her her loyalty, her generosity and spirit, her activism and commitment and so on. And as we've heard tonight, so we could go on probably for another couple of hours talking about all that she did. And there are many people here who worked very closely with her over those years, and we could all reminisce much more. What I remember, for example, about the Nottingham conference is we all slept on the floor because we didn't have any money for any hotels or anything. Those who were involved in organizing it in various ways, it was mainly Marika, but there were others of us who were involved. We all slept on the floor together, as it were, men, women, and so on. And that also was part of the kind of spirit of those times, but also the spirit that she encouraged. So we have one final speaker, and then we should probably wrap things up. So I'm going to ask Amelia to come and say a few words. Amelia's speaking, I think, on behalf of History Matters, who Marika worked with towards the end of her life. Amelia.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Before I start, I just want to say a massive thank you to Hakeem and everyone who's put this wonderful event on tonight. So thank you very much. So as Hakeem mentioned, I'm speaking on behalf today of History Matters, but my love of Marika goes far beyond just that organisation. So I, just like Perry mentioned, I first became acquainted with Marika as a young researcher and reader before I knew her personally. And I've always been really interested in history, in particular Black British history, but always felt somewhat of an imposter, I guess, in traditional education spaces. And I remember really struggling at university with readings and the academic language that we've heard Marika had so many issues with. But it was, I think, because of this barrier that, that particular language gives young people, it really validates her hatred of it. So I felt very much an imposter at my university because I just couldn't understand what on earth people were writing about half the time. And then I came across Marika's books, in particular her book on Claudia Jones and that of Malcolm X and his visits to various places abroad. And it was those two books in particular that really struck me, and I suddenly realized that actually, for those people who care about educating others, they write in a certain way to educate others. And those who don't care about that so much write in a different way. And so that gave me inspiration in terms of how I approach writing. And of course, Hakim's books have given me that same basis. So that was my experience before meeting Marika. And the first time I met her face to face was while I was doing a project for Medway African Caribbean Association, who the chair Carol is with us today. And that was in 2018 that the exhibition was launched. And this was Untold Stories, the history of Black people in Kent. And that was the first exhibition of its kind, which documented this previously hidden history of people of African and Caribbean heritage in Kent. And Marika's work was completely seminal to that exhibition. Without her research, we would have had nothing to exhibit and nothing to talk about. And on that project, Marika was the consultant, and I was researching, and that's when I learned the wrath of her red pen, which we've heard so much about today. But even with that wrath, I was just always so in awe of her knowledge of the topic, which is unparalleled, but also her encouragement of young people. And at that time, she was counting her days, and she would say to me, Amelia, I'm gonna pass away any minute, so you need to take up this project for me, this project. And I have to admit that I didn't take her seriously, because I would just look at her energy and think, you're probably gonna outlive me. So yeah, this was the kind of spirit that we know so much about Marika. But we set up the History Matters Journal a few years ago. And the basis of setting this up was because, as you all know, BASA newsletter provided a very unique space in presenting research from all kinds of people from all walks of life around the histories of African, Caribbean, Asian people in Britain. And without that newsletter still going, there was, I guess, a void that needed filling. And so History Matters decided to launch a new journal, and Marika was the honorary editor-in-chief of that journal. And I was, I guess, editor, so I would send her copies to proofread.
We know what's
and grit my teeth every time she sent it back in an envelope. And I remember one particular issue of the journal that I sent to her came back not intact. There were pages ripped out. In particular, her own article was ripped out, and there was just red lines throughout the entire journal. And she said, I don't think this journal actually has an editor. And I had to convince her that I was editing before I sent them to her. But anyways, even with that, she was still always very encouraging. And the video that we have watched earlier this evening, and just the words that everyone has spoken, remind us that Marika was always encouraging, in particular, young people, people of African Caribbean descent, but also anyone who had this desire to push forward this history and push forward a positive change. And as we heard in the video, we can do this in as many ways as we can possibly think of. So this is the work that organizations like Young Historians Project and History Matters does, is to present these histories in as many ways as possible, as accessibly as possible, so that this becomes something that we all have a basic understanding of, if not, a Marika level understanding of. So the History Matters Journal is always dedicated to someone who has pushed forward this field and has recently passed away. So some former issues of the journal have been dedicated to people like Mavis Best, Harry Goldborn, and of course the future issue of the journal will be dedicated to Marika, and it will be extremely well edited, I promise. If anyone would like to submit their testimonies, recollections of Marika to the journal, please feel free to, and it will plaster them all over the pages. If you have any photographs of Marika that you want to submit, anything at all related to her, then please send them our way and we'll publish them in the next journal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Now, I just wanted to say before we close formally, I just was reflecting on what I said about Marika's publications and scholarship and so on, and people will think I'm a little bit remiss if I don't mention that we actually wrote 3 books together. One of those with Martin and Dan has already been mentioned, but Marika and I wrote 2 books together. Pan-African History, which is probably the most well-known, not that it's very well-known, but it's probably the 2 the most well-known. But the other one it's actually the anniversary of the other one, which was called the Manchester Pan-African Congress Revisited, and was first published in 1995. So it's the, whatever that is, the 30th anniversary of its publication this year. We're trying to republish it because obviously it's, by coincidence, also the anniversary of the Manchester Congress this year, whatever it is, 80th anniversary. So we're trying to get that book republished. But I just wanted to say something about it because, again, it's typical of Marika. If you look very carefully in the introduction that she writes, it says Marika Sherwood, editor. And she has various other contributions in that book. And I have a very, very brief contribution. I literally wrote the first part of it. It's mainly a republication of the proceedings of the Manchester Congress. But I, with Marika's encouragement, wrote a kind of introductory piece which places a Congress in context and so on. Now, I have to tell you that all the primary sources, all the archival sources for that piece of work which I did, all of them came from Marika. In fact, everything in the book is of Marika. As I say, I wrote it, but it was all her research. And it was one of the first books, 30 years ago, so I was even younger then than I am now. It's a long time ago. I think it was probably the first book that I was involved in writing or contributing to. And as far as I was concerned, it was Marika's book. She was the editor and so on. And as you know, it actually says somewhere in the inside she's the editor. But when the book was published, my name appears first before hers as the co-author of this book. And I never actually asked her why do I appear as a co-author? But it's typical of her generosity that she would do something like that as a way of encouraging me at that time, a very young historian and researcher and so on. So anyway, I just thought I would share that with you. So we do have to draw to a close. We have a little bit more time here. If people want to have some more food, teas, coffees, people want to reminisce about Marika. But I wanted to leave the last words to Marika. And I did say at the beginning that this evening was organized by Marika generally. And so I want to finish with her words. Because this is what she asked for. What do I have in mind? I think maybe my death, a sort of funeral, could be used to recall Bassa and its very important newsletter, which was well distributed while I edited it. And all the conferences it organized, as well as the monthly seminars, all that I had published, all the talks that I gave, the absolute total necessity for all these to be replicated. So I hope that we've managed to do some of that this evening. I thank you all so much for attending. A special thanks to all those who contributed. But you heard that Marika's wish was that all the work she and others did should be replicated, should be continued, should be advanced. And so I'm allowing you all to have some time for discussion and to consider exactly how you're going to do that. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
All of us gonna go. Yes.